All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Lawyers in the Attic. My name is David Parsons. I am sitting here with the one and only Danielle De Smeth. How's it going, Danielle?
Pretty good, David. How are you?
Good. Your name is on the on the marquee outside. Bamieh De Smeth. That's like a big deal. That's like celebrity shit to me. And I want to talk about like kind of what that means, like what it is to be a partner in a law firm. I'm a person who is just starting law school. I just finished my first semester. I'm at a moment where everyone I know is asking me when I tell them I'm going to law school, because I'm kind of like later in life doing law school, they're asking, what kind of lawyer do you want to be? And it reminds me of, I went to graduate school for history many years ago, and right away people were asking me, what do you want to study? What part of history do you want to study? And it was kind of like a moment where I had no idea. I just had kind of a general idea. So I'm wondering, like, what was your path? When you were in law school or thinking about going to law school, did you know what kind of lawyer you wanted to be? Is everyone supposed to know that I want to do criminal law or I want to do personal injury? Or how did that process work for you?
I actually just got this question at lunch today.
Uh-huh.
It was a networking lunch.
Uh-huh.
So I'm in a networking group and we cross-refer business. So the idea is that you have someone from each industry represented, and like there's a finance guy at lunch, and there's an insurance guy at lunch. It sounds like the start of like a bad joke.
Yes.
And so everyone, and the question that I got at lunch it was very similar. It's like, how did you get interested in the law? And for me, it was a friend pulling me into a high school practice for the high school mock trial team, like here in Ventura. And I know you also competed on that team.
Yeah, like let's get that out of the way right now, because you and I went to the same high school. You were there a few years after me, I think. But either way, we both encountered Ron Bamieh through mock trial.
Right.
So Ron Bamieh is the guy, the other guy with the name on the marquee, and he's obviously will be on the show a lot. But we both encountered him as high school students going to mock trial. What made you go to mock trial? Because I can barely remember it at this point.
It was my friend Tiffany grabbed me. It was going to be after school, and I was already involved in plenty of activities, as I bet you were too.
Right.
And she said, no, Danielle, you are going to love this. And this was the end of my sophomore year. So I was already doing a lot of other stuff, newspaper and drama and tennis and you name it. So I was thinking, I honestly don't need another thing. And she said, just trust me. And Tiffany was like a smart girl, kept to herself, was not one to push something on other people.
Right.
So I thought, all right, I should go with her. So she pulls us into our English professor's classroom, and I walk in, and there is Ron Bamieh, Mr. Bamieh at the time, at the front of the classroom, deputy district attorney. He couldn't have been more than 31 years old at the time.
I know.
But, as a 14, 15-year-old, he seemed big, imposing, to know what he was talking about. And he started talking about how we were going to win. Buena High School was going to win the mock trial county championship. And then we were going to go on and win the state championship. And I thought, okay, this sounds fun. 'Cause I'm competitive, right? Most lawyers, I think, have a competitive streak in them.
That's interesting. Yeah, that part of it I think is important.
Yeah, and then I just ran with it. And he actually told me at the start, he gave me an assignment on the team that I didn't want. I wanted to be a trial attorney.
Right.
I wanted to have the closing argument. And he gave me basically like some understudy role. And I thought, no, I want to be the trial attorney. So I just asked him if I could tag along through the summer practices with the students who he thought were good enough to be trial attorney. And sure enough, I hung in there, and one of them dropped out in the fall when the season actually started. And then I just slid in there, and I won best defense attorney both years I competed.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Like at the main
For the
competition?
county.
At the government center?
Yeah.
When you were in this, were you thinking, oh, this might lead to a career in law? Like, this is what I'm doing? Like, at what point are you, like, kind of thinking, actually, my friend Tiffany, like, gave me my life?
She did. She changed the course of what I was thinking I was going to study because I loved biology and physiology at the time. I was fascinated by the brain and how the brain worked and the ocean. So I was thinking maybe marine biology.
This is really weird. I was obsessed with marine biology after we went to SeaWorld when I was a kid.
Well, we live by the ocean.
Shamu and all that. I've changed my mind about SeaWorld over the years.
Sure. Most have.
But either way, yeah, marine biology and and something to do with yeah, being a doctor, or I don't know why
Right.
I thought that. It was just
Right. Well,
yeah.
I was still keeping the hope alive when I
Yeah.
went off to UC Berkeley, and I learned they didn't have a mock trial team. So I started Cal's team with another guy who was there. He was a senior who had been trying to get the team going. So he and I together started Cal Mock Trial. But I came in as a freshman, and I was still thinking, okay, maybe biology. So I tried Bio 1B.
Right.
But it was a pre-med weeder class. You had to be there at like 7:45 in the morning, and as a freshman in college, not
Weeder class, is that like the class is just like make it so hard that only the people that are genuinely dedicated will stay?
it weeds
Yes.
you out. Yeah,
Yeah.
and everyone who was there to go pre-med and go to medical school was like on top of it, and I was just there like, I like biology. I'll learn about plants
Sure.
my freshman year.
Yeah.
But no, I quickly changed that course to pass not pass, and started really spending all my time doing mock trial and studying education.
And so you have mock trial in college, and I assume there are other college campuses that have there's like a mock trial college thing. It's huge, right?
Oh yeah, it's AMPTA is the American Mock Trial Association, and back at the time, it now rotates, but back at the time, like the tournament to get to was top 48 teams in the country. It was always in Des Moines, Iowa, and
these
so,
are undergrads that aren't like
Yes.
in law school. They're
Correct.
just like pre-law kids.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have coaches like who are institutional coaches, just like an athletic team,
Right.
who learn how to play the game of mock trial and how do you present a case in the most, I guess, broadly appealable way.
Right.
And
Yeah.
especially when you're in Des Moines, Iowa, you really noticed how different styles from different parts of the country played differently. So like the Northeast traditionally was like more sharp, more sarcastic, more aggressive. The Southern teams were slower and nicer. And the Midwest was kind of just a really nice place to kind of combine.
Practical. I think the Midwest is practical.
Yeah.
That's really
Be
interesting.
plain spoken and nice.
Regional, like one thing I've learned immediately in the first semester of law school is, all these different, every state has a different bar, like you can't just be a lawyer in one state and go and be a lawyer in other states. And I get that because of different laws, but now I'm thinking it's like also like just different regional styles too, like
Yeah.
different manners and approaches to just being in the courtroom. I remember Ron telling us a story, actually. I remember stories from him from high school, and he told us a story once of like being in a courtroom and like being hot and like taking off his coat, and the judge being like, "You don't take off a coat in my courtroom."
Right.
And kind of like different etiquette elements of it. Yeah.
That it was absolutely like that, and even competing it was like that. But now with the pandemic, everything is more casual in office and in courtroom.
Just go in your pajamas.
Yeah. But I think getting back to your initial question about how you figure out your way, I think
Yes.
it's just by doing. And now when I speak to law students or on panels, but the quote that keeps coming up that I love to share because it blew my mind when I heard it was by Joseph Campbell, who's a brilliant storyteller.
Yes.
You may have read like The Power of Myth.
Oh yeah, of course.
And storytelling is so integral to who we are as a species. And then, of course, then as you figure out how to communicate your case, you have to know how to integrate the art of storytelling.
Right.
But one of the quotes that I heard from Joseph Campbell was that if you can see your path, it's not your path.
Interesting.
And it's just such a nice,
What does that mean?
a nice, concise way to describe how life is always going to throw these curveballs at you that you
Right.
don't see coming. So no matter what your plan is, right? Like I'm going to be a marine biologist or a brain surgeon. And then Tiffany pulls me into
Yeah.
mock trial. And I'm like, wow, now I'm exposed to an entirely different career path and accessing different skills that I want to develop. And you go with it. And I think that the best advice I can give is that if you just focus on the present and all of the opportunities that are currently available, and you take advantage of those that interest you, and I think listen to your gut a little bit too,
Yeah.
then you're going to be on your path.
Well, I didn't even know what the paths were, and when I say that, I know what the law is, and I know what being a lawyer is generally, but your firm, as an example, does different types of law: criminal defense, personal injury, family law. those are very different things and seem like they touch on really different elements of society and what the world is. So I'm kind of wondering, like, because it sounds like, is mock trial all criminal defense? Is when you do mock trial?
No,
I remember just criminal cases.
in high school in California, the Constitutional Rights Foundation, it's always a criminal case. But in college, it rotates civil and criminal. And same thing with law school. I competed at the law school level also. So you get more civil cases in law school, and even distribution civil cases, criminal cases in college.
So what attracted you the most? Because it sounds like, I think that a lot of people have in their mind, I think maybe this is just because of like movies and TV shows of criminal attorneys as the kind of like, that's the spotlight, the circus, the center of the circus, the kind of place you want to be.
Yeah.
But now I'm learning of all these, like, for instance, this is what kind of blew my mind. And maybe it's my own ignorance of what law school would be like. But we're only doing like one semester of criminal law. And then everything else is like about property. Like everything is about property.
Wills.
A lot.
Trust,
yeah, exactly. Estates, community property.
Business associations.
Will, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, at what point are you sort of thinking, you know, those different kind of genres of attorney, where your interest is and where your opportunities are? Because it seems like that's sort of where I'm at right now. Is sort of like, oh, okay, there are these big giant areas of law to fall into.
Yeah. And
there are really different lives and jobs and
very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and different satisfaction rates.
Right.
So what attracted me in mock trial was the fact that I got to be on stage. I got to do like live thinking, questioning from a judge or questioning of a witness. And so there's that aspect of it. Or if you've done some theater, you know, like there's that kind of adrenaline rush to it.
You get to be a ham a little bit.
Absolutely.
That was I mean, that's why I think mock trial, when I really think about it, why it appealed to me is the drama element of it. I wanted to perform a little bit.
But the vast majority of lawyers, as you're saying, are not in the courtroom, and that's not an element of their job. The element of their job is like dissecting a contract and editing it to try to guess at basically where could the problem come up in the future based on how this contract's written, and how do I need to edit the language to make sure that my client is most protected. Or
that's like the small print lawyer, right? The lawyer that's in there sort of like making, that's a whole other sort of. And
but that's what some people are best suited for, and that's what they love doing. They're comfortable doing. They don't want to be anywhere near a courtroom or speaking in front of a group.
Right.
So I think a lot of people do assume, as you said, because of the media, that all attorneys are out there and great public speakers. No, not true. Many of them are introverts, and they're just super analytical, and just want to be in their brain all the time.
Almost mathy. Like, one of our professors is a corporate attorney who she's like, I do not go to a courtroom. I'm comfortable, like, behind my screen, like, working on a computer, essentially.
Yeah.
And it seems like, I don't know. That's not the like sexy form of law of like being a lawyer that we generally think of.
Right, but you know,
it's a lot of money to be made in that
exactly.
area.
Like some people, if you think like money is sexy, then you want to go work perhaps for a big law, big corporation, and that is what you're doing. It's a lot of paper.
Because I also think of like the thankless job lawyer, you know, like the lawyer that just like, there's also the image you have of like the social justice lawyer, or the lawyer that's like carrying a million binders in their hands and is just overloaded and makes. I think of that often with like public defenders. That's like an image we have of overworked, underpaid,
hunched over.
Yes.
Yeah, just beaten down by the caseload.
Right.
And the weight of the system.
Yes.
It is.
I'd say it's because there are so many lines between being a lawyer and being an academic. And you can wind up in all these different places where you could be like the top academic at an Ivy League institution getting paid tons of money, lots of pictures of you everywhere. You're sort of a star. But there's also like the kind of like thankless job of being in like public colleges, working as an adjunct, making very little money with like 5 courses. It seems like there's a wide range of different ways you can wind up like that.
Yes, and I saw the nonprofit world that you're describing.
Yeah.
I did an internship in college at the Environmental Law Institute in DC, which is really policy driven. And then like parlayed that in law school to an internship at the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC,
This
in
is
Santa
biology
Monica.
and marine biology coming back somewhat,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah, and the interest in the environment, and that's actually what landed me my first like substantial law gig, because I graduated law school in '08 and was licensed at the height of the recession,
That's right.
and all the job offers dried up.
Yeah.
I had an offer from a firm. I was interning in a DA's office. I thought, okay, this is where I'm going, get some trial experience. But then no, again, with life throwing you curveballs and not knowing,
Yeah.
and then just pivoting and looking at, all right, here's what I've done and like where my interests align. And I found a job post on Craigslist in Santa Barbara, which was a homecoming, because since I had left for college, I had not been back on the Central Coast. And they liked that I had a tie to the community, because especially at the time, it was harder to find people to hold down jobs and stay.
Right.
Especially in Santa Barbara, which is where the job was. And so to have like the background with the environmental law tinge and having been from here, it was just the perfect fit that got me here back home. And I don't want to ever live anywhere else. I love it. So that part of looking back now on the path, I can see how, where I couldn't see the path at the time,
Yeah.
now it's so clear. It sounds so silly, right? Well, of course, looking back, you're going to see how you got to where you are. But it really is an interesting thing. And same thing like in college, while I knew I wanted to go to law school, I always wanted to study education, because I'm the daughter of a public educator and always thought that this was the most important institution in our society to help individuals and society at large. Like, just if the better educated everyone is, the better off we all are.
What kind of public educator are we talking about?
So so my mom's and stepdad both started as teachers,
Okay.
then became principals, and then became administrators. My mom retired after 41 years.
Here in California?
Yeah. My mom was her whole career in Bamieh School District, elementary school district, and finished as assistant superintendent. And she had handled assistant soup in charge of HR, classified personnel, and also curriculum. And so we had fascinating conversations growing up about what was happening in public schools. And then I was very active in my school and represented my school in a number of activities like Girls State. And when our assembly member, Hannah Beth Jackson, had hosted a roundtable with our state senator at the time about a bunch of education reform that was being pushed through in the late 90s, and they wanted student representative there to kind of weigh in, token student voice about the high school exit exam, the academic performance index. There were a number of bills that were being pushed through the legislature at the time, and I remember finding it fascinating as a student to be reading these bills and seeing how my public education was being shaped by these legislators up in Sacramento.
Right.
So that's what I ended up writing my thesis about in college. I built my own major around education as an institution in society, and then wrote the thesis about what had happened in the 4 years since those bills that I had looked at as a high school student had been implemented. And it was a little early to have enough data, but it was fun to like bring it full circle.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard you mention a couple times education and how that intersects with your life as a lawyer. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what kind of cases are we talking about when you're talking about education and the law? Because it seems like, I mean, we're at a moment right now where people are talking a lot about higher education and what people are allowed to say and those sorts of people getting fired, those sorts of things. And it just seems like, I mean, I've been in colleges for most of my adult life, so it seems like attorneys intersect with that world in some way. How is it for you?
Yeah, I've had some higher education cases, not yet a free speech type case, which is what you're describing.
Yeah.
But Title IX cases, people have probably heard that word a lot. And there's two different types. There's the Title IX case, which has to do with equal access to athletics across genders. But the type that we deal with is when there's been a sexual assault on campus, is the school giving the survivor and also sometimes the accused we will represent, but usually focusing on, is the survivor getting the accommodations to continue with their education as best they can in light of the trauma that they've suffered? So if both students who were involved are still on campus, making sure that the Title IX office has put in place an appropriate like stay away order, or if they were in the same class, like not making one person take a test in the same room with someone who raped them.
Wow.
Yeah. So Title IX cases, and then at lower levels, we handle. It's all part of under the broader umbrella of personal injury, which we handle a lot of.
Yeah.
But it's personal injury in the school setting. So it can happen to students where one student is bullied by another, or one student is beat up by another, or unfortunately, we've had a lot of cases where adults, as school employees, are victimizing students, and then the school district, or the regents aren't necessarily responsible for an intentional act of a teacher that's outside the course and scope of their employment, like an inappropriate touching or a sexual assault. But usually someone else who works there, should have reported it, or reprimanded, disciplined, or fired that bad actor and didn't. And it's the negligence of that person who should have said something that creates the liability for the school district.
So we're talking about, now this touches criminal law, but you're not talking about criminal law specifically right here.
Right.
You're talking about maybe a crime has been committed, but you're talking about the way that administration is handling the sort of fallout of the crime, if that makes sense.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. So if you imagine a situation that nobody wants to, especially a parent, imagine, but if there's a teacher or a principal who is making inappropriate comments about, let's say, female students' clothing, or inappropriately touching female students, and it usually starts innocently with like hand on shoulder. And then a lot of us now know the term grooming, and just like developing that relationship. And there are other people at school who should see this behavior, because schools are a heavily regulated environment. When those other people don't say anything, then it creates a civil liability for the school and the district. There may be criminal liability too for that individual who's doing the inappropriate touching, but there's also civil liability for the school. And when I say civil liability, I mean when you get sued, you're being asked to pay money for the damage that you did for failing to act and prevent that harm to the child.
See, that's where I think a line comes in, thinking about the law, because I've thought about the law in my life, but I've never really thought about it as deeply as I have in this first semester of law school. But one of the things that it's kind of forced me to think about is money as justice, right? And like that part of it seems like, okay, in criminal law, justice is going to be someone goes to jail, someone goes away, someone gets punished, essentially.
Yeah.
But then there's also this other form of law where someone pays someone else, or an institution pays someone. That part of it blows my mind to me, because it's such an admission that money is a form of justice. Does that make sense? And does that? I guess part of me is wondering, like, is that an imperfect system, or is it just what we've got? Because I can say that if I've been wronged, especially by someone with deep pockets, I want them to pay me.
Right.
And yet it seems like, I don't know, you hear a lot about tort reform and all that kind of stuff. It's part of like the larger discourse about politics. And we can touch on that, but I'm mainly just wondering, like, what's your experience with people and seeing money as justice? Are those things related, or is it just kind of like the best Band-Aid we have?
You just brought up so many like hot button issues
Sorry.
for tort lawyers. No, it's good, because you're describing like one of the moments in law school that I remember most from the first year is learning this in torts class. First of all, you look at your schedule and you're like, torts, what is a tort? And my tort professor's first slide was a photo of like a cake.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, totally.
And
Yeah.
it's a tort. It's not this kind of tort with the E on the end. It's this, and it's a civil wrong where you're asking for money. And that concept also blew my mind. Like, so the goal of the law is to try to make someone whole. And the way that we're going to try to make them whole, whether they've been, they've lost an arm in a terrible accident, or someone's inappropriately touched them, is to give them money.
Yeah.
That's the best way that we know how
Yes.
to compensate someone for what they've been
It's
through.
such an admission of how powerful money is.
Yeah.
In a way. But
Yeah.
it is also kind of like, is it sometimes a bitter pill?
Yes. And is an inequity in the way that the money is used as the value metric for the injury that we've suffered. So, for instance, I think we see it too in the way that we treat our veterans, or have historically treated our veterans, where the VA has been really good at helping someone cope with the loss of a limb, but not so good at helping people deal with the mental health, the trauma, the PTSD that people who serve our country come back with.
Sure.
The same thing is true when you're trying to evaluate a civil case. In a sexual assault situation, you don't usually have a broken bone, or because when you have a broken bone and you go to the hospital, you have a bill from the hospital about what that broken bone is worth.
$75,000.
Because it's how much exactly? Well, no, that's the aspirin. The aspirin is $75,000.
Right.
Yes, but because insurance companies paid a certain amount, it's easy for us to put a dollar value on the broken bone injury. But
with trauma, you're like, how
trauma
much?
of a rape, I think if you ask people, you choose, would you rather have your arm broken or would you rather get raped? But
and how much is that worth? How
in
much
a
is
civil
each
case,
experience worth? Jesus
yes,
Christ.
and the difficulty for us on the plaintiff side is a lot of times juries are all over the place in their valuation because it depends on each individual juror's experience, and defense attorneys and insurance companies will play that to their advantage, and they say, well, you don't know how a jury is going to evaluate this emotional damage.
Right.
Because it's just a nebulous figure. So what we do is we end up using other similar cases to usually come to a resolution.
Precedent.
Yes. Very good.
When has it worked before, and how much money was it worth? That to me is so intense. I mean, part of it makes me. We just went through a couple. I mean, it seems like a long time ago, honestly, but it's still around in the culture. The whole like Me Too movement, which was a lot of attention on these kinds of issues. And what you learned is that a lot of people, especially high profile people, I won't name any of them, the people who are on the Jeffrey Epstein list, tend to like just pay out to keep things quiet. And you hear like, oh, okay, someone was sued for sexually assaulting someone. And they just basically went, I think P. Diddy, this has happened with Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, whatever he goes by. There was, just a couple weeks ago, there was a lot of news about he's being accused of all this stuff. And then it was just instantly settled. Like the next day, they were like, he settled it. Like,
Right.
and I'm like, isn't that just a guy reaching in his pocket and being like, oh, sorry, I sexually assaulted you.
Right.
Here's $400,000.
Sure. Or then you have the opposite example. I just sat on a panel to talk about the Depp v. Heard trial.
Yes. Holy shit.
That happened last year.
Yes.
Right. And there were multiple trials because Johnny Depp also sued publication in Britain for publishing what Amber Heard had said happened. And he lost in that case against the publication. And then so when he sued here in the States, he did not sue the newspaper that published Amber Heard's op-ed, where she said that she had become basically the face of the Me Too movement.
Right.
Instead, just sued her for defamation. So there are all of these very interesting elements because it was, I think, just after the crest of the Me Too movement that the case came to trial. But it was the Me Too movement and their tumultuous relationship, her getting the restraining order, and then writing the articles that were born out of Me Too. So it did it put all of these issues right in the forefront.
God, yeah, that trial, so ugly. I felt really gross when that was on. It felt like, I don't know, it felt fake in some way, and I know it wasn't, but it felt like you were watching sort of like, I don't know, something very manipulated.
Movie?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's got Johnny Depp in it, but
and he was clearly the better actor.
yes, if people will be looking back at that, I think, as like a fulcrum point in the Me Too movement. It seems like the whatever backlash that there was happening in that trial. There was like I mean, he was able to orchestrate. And for me, like, I think that a lot of people viewed it the same way that I would just basically like, I was kind of like grossed out by the whole thing and at both of their behavior.
Both sides, yeah.
But it also felt like this is the power of a dude to manipulate a story and kind of bring us back to a sort of like anti-feminist backlash place that
His-
is an often natural place for politics to be, or cultural politics, whatever we're calling this.
Yeah, and his trial team and their performance, they were brilliant in how well they worked together and used the facts that were available to them, and also just owned up to certain bad facts that they knew they were going to have to contend with, and they
Right.
let Depp be Depp, right? And like I said on the panel, no way would you ever let your client walk into court in like dark shaded sunglasses and the dark coat and the dark shirt and the dark tie. You know, it's all very dark, and
Yes.
you want to usually like
Brighten it up a little
respect-
bit? Yes.
yeah, the power of the light and the dark, and the Star Wars and themes as old as time. But
Play the Joseph Campbell stuff.
yeah,
Yes.
but they were really good about knowing that they had to let their client be their client. Also, because he's a famous movie star, and it wasn't going to be held against him like it may have been held against other people, like Amber Heard
Right.
and others. But I think you're right about that. The backlash, and just the prevalence of now social media, but even podcasting, and the fact that the trial was live streamed.
Yes.
And that there were podcasters like us
Yes.
with their earphones and their microphones in front of them, like live commenting on the trial
Crazy.
to their viewers. It really was.
It was kind of like the sequel to OJ in a way, because OJ there was no social media when OJ happened, and yet it sort of took over our imagination. It was everywhere.
Yes.
But the live
We all
commenting
have
thing.
images, right, that we saw on TV of OJ with the glove.
Oh yeah.
Then I even remember in high school here where we both went, they announced the verdict over the loudspeaker system
Yeah.
to the whole campus.
Yes.
And I thought that was so bizarre.
Ron talked about the case because that was in mock trial. Well, this is 94, right? Yeah, I was in mock trial at Boyna High School while the OJ trial was happening, and I remember Ron talking about the case, and like he would bring up different pieces of it because it was impossible to avoid.
Right.
And it was also kind of like weird lesson in how all of this worked. I guess that definitely had an impact on me in thinking about like, oh, this is where there's a celebrity angle.
Yes.
There's a kind of fun storytelling, like, I don't know. It feels like, I don't know. Part of me is thinking a lot about, obviously, like as a transition from being like a historian to a lawyer. I'm like, it's the same job. They're both taking a story from the past and telling their version of it for some sort of effect in the present, right?
True, and keeping in mind precedent, as you
Yes,
mentioned, right?
yes.
Past cases to
Right.
inform the law that you're arguing today.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are parallels with OJ, certainly in the celebrity aspect, the heavy media aspect, even though it's a very different form of media in the 90s and today.
Yes.
But I think one of the huge differences was that the OJ jury was sequestered.
Right.
I think for something like 9 months. Don't quote me on that, but it was it was many, many months. And so by the time they were released to go deliberate, they came to a decision so fast that they'd all made up their mind. I think they were just fed up.
They were ready to go home.
Yeah, but they didn't in the 90s. They didn't have access to the cell phones and the social media like we all do. And like, of course,
How could
jurors,
you even sequester a jury now?
I don't think you could because, every time I was just in a month-long jury trial in August, and every time you break, the judge gives the same admonition, don't check your phones, don't talk to anyone about the case. And I'm thinking, you're just making it all the more likely that they are going to go do that. And of course, people are going to do that, especially in a high-profile case.
Yeah.
So, and then with In-Depth v. Heard, with all of these social media commentators,
How could you avoid it?
Yeah, I don't think you could.
God, that's nuts. So back to the element of money as justice.
Yeah.
I know it's like kind of like a big philosophical thing a little bit, but it feels like it's part of the job one way or the other, right? And like people are when people come to you, they are seeking some knowledge of money. How can I get money? Do I have a case? It seems like that's central.
It is.
Yet, like, I don't know. I get the thing I was getting at was the criminal part of it and the connection, because not everybody is a victim of crime gets paid out by the person that victimized them, right? There's
Right.
like, these are two different
Right.
things.
No. And so the criminal aspect, we're counseling clients on this all the time because we're dealing with people who were injured, and oftentimes the person who did the injuring is criminally culpable.
Right.
And because we also have the criminal practice, we can talk people through that process all day long. So let's take a car accident situation where you get hit by a drunk driver and they take off. Well, one, the driver is criminally culpable because they were driving drunk. Two, they left the scene. They probably committed some other crimes too in the process. So the prosecutor will bring, so the police write a report. The report gets referred over to the prosecutor to decide what charges to file. And like simultaneously, the person who got hit also has to deal with their insurance company, maybe the driver's insurance company, to deal with the property damage to the car, but then also usually personal injury to them, and then deal with the insurance companies who paid. So everything gets intertwined usually in our cases. So we're talking our clients through the fact that we represent the person who was hit, who was injured. We say, here's what's happening in the criminal case. It's long and slow, and the DA charges may end up in some kind of compromise.
And that's other lawyers handling that criminal element.
Yeah,
You're
so
just
it's
sort
like
of, this person is your client for the civil element of it.
Right. But I think, one thing we do and help people with is because we do criminal law, also we can kind of talk them through that process and help them understand.
Right.
Why does it take so long? And it also helps them when we're trying to explain this concept of, hey, in a civil case, we can only ask for money. And then we can point to that criminal prosecution. That is the punishment for the individual in terms of keeping society safe. If jail time is appropriate, right?
Right.
Taking them, removing them from society, punishing them, hoping they learn their lesson, or in certain other crimes, putting them through treatments. If it's a habitual alcoholic or substance abuser, the court will order those other remedies too. But coming back to the civil wrong, we're usually then just haggling with an insurance company about what is the monetary damage to the person, and usually that's a hospital bill. And it's also really important to show, did they get treatment? Like, did you have, we say, soft tissue damage, and did you go to a chiropractor, or did you get massage, or do you have PTSD?
Starts adding up.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you've never been in a car accident, but I was just backing out of like Pete's Coffee after court one day over on Victoria, and someone came around the curb and just rear-ended me, and like coffee went all over my suit, and I was just jarred because you're not expecting it.
Sure.
And for the next few months, I felt that. You're just checking the
we got a
rearview
Tort
mirror,
on our hand here.
checking the rearview mirror all the time.
Yeah.
But it's that type of injury that is constantly with you, just like a nagging shoulder pain.
How do you quantify that I have bad dreams?
Yeah.
And it sucks that I got in an accident and it made me anxious now. I mean, those things, to me as a person who's gone through a lot of anxiety in my life, I know that that's like real suffering. But I'm also like kind of like, well, how do I explain that to someone? How do we bring that to court and say, this is worth this amount of money?
It's nice that we're talking about it more now because it helps. Because, even a generation ago, no one was going to talk about it. Was frowned upon, and there was shame if you talked about feeling anxiety.
Oh yeah.
Or depression.
Yeah. Or PTSD.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, veterans. They used to be called John Wayne syndrome in like the 60s. It was sort of like, oh, this sort of like shut up man that doesn't like talk about his emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, which is actually doing more harm.
Now we have the Johnny Depp man. Talks too much.
The goblet of wine.
Yeah. Oh God. There were so many memes. I think that was part of what was disturbing. Because I was like, OJ didn't have memes, right? Like there wasn't like a whole world of like weird cartoons. But
but you can imagine now, knowing what a meme is, looking back on the OJ trial, what the memes would have been. It would have been the Bronco, the Bronco on the freeway, the glove, like on and off.
Well, Johnny Cochran is like made for, and I guess that's sort of like another element that I wanted to bring up with you just in our first discussion here about being a lawyer. Is sort of like the popular image of the lawyer. There's so many elements to it because part of Americans in American imagination, whatever that is, really respects lawyers, and like lawyers, every president has been a lawyer. Lawyers are the people that are associated with truth and justice and that sort of thing. But there's also this image like the Better Call Saul lawyer, the Johnny Cochran lawyer, the the sleazeball lawyer that's on TV being like, I'll fight for you. If you've been injured, I'll get you a payout. How do you balance all of that because those are all just pop culture images.
Yeah.
And yet, as I'm going into law school, I'm like meeting more like actual lawyers, and that's part of why I wanted to talk to lawyers in the attic about like what the actual world is, because so much of our ideas of lawyers, especially if you're not raised around lawyers, they're not your mom and dad, you don't really intersect with that world, you're sort of like have very cartoonish images of what a lawyer does.
Sure.
And that doesn't square with your life, it doesn't seem like.
No. I think the appropriate term that like came out of like England is counselor at law.
Yeah.
Because what we do is a lot of counseling. We do a lot of listening. And we're doing a good job for our clients. We see just in basic client satisfaction rates, when clients feel heard and they feel advocated for, even if it's not the result that they wanted, we help them understand why it's a just result anyhow because of other cases. But it also relates to something you said earlier. It made me think when clients come in, it's also, I think, a stereotype or misconception that most people who are bringing lawsuits, or a lot of people who are bringing lawsuits, are just money hungry and looking for money.
Yes.
And that's usually not what clients are looking for at all. Most people...
The fake
whiplash.
Yep.
No. Most people who come in don't want to be here.
Yes.
It was their last resort. Because
something terrible has happened to them generally.
Yeah, most people are pretty sane and they don't want to, one, get involved with the legal system. Two, a lot of people just want to avoid the unpleasant thing that happened to them.
Right.
And coming to a lawyer is the opposite of that, because we have to delve into it by nature of learning about the case and advocating for our clients. But most people are coming in because they feel that there has been a wrong and they want to find a sense of justice. So.
And there's, it sounds like there's a therapy element too. I mean, we're sitting here on a couch.
Huge.
It seems like, because if I've only gone to a lawyer a couple times in my life. One of them was because a landlord was fucking me over. And it was kind of a desperate situation. This was in New York City where things are rough.
Yes, I did. I was a renter there.
Like really insane, honestly. And the situation had gotten so bad, and this guy owed me money. And there was a lawyer that I knew I didn't have money to afford one. And that's another thing. It's like there's a feeling like, how do an ordinary person access a lawyer? We'll get to that part of it. But like there was a lawyer that was available through our graduate school, like through our union, I think. It was like, oh, you can go get free legal advice. And I remember going to this guy, and it felt like relief in a sense, just to be like in the room with someone that seemed to know what they were talking about and seemed to have some ability to like explain what was happening, what I could do, what my options were. In other words, there was a comfort, like a sign of sort of like, oh, thank God this person is here. And I think that part of the like lawyer role is one that is sort of like, I don't know, not as much in the pop culture stereotype, right? That like listener.
And most of us are just so busy with day-to-day life, just to carve out time to talk to a professional, as you're describing about it, brings a peace of mind.
That's true.
Because you feel that, okay, I'm doing right by myself for actually having someone who knows what they're talking about give me some advice about the situation. That can bring enough peace of mind sometimes. We have people who are happy just to have us hear them out and tell them, we don't really see a claim and here's why. And they feel better because they feel like, okay, I did what I needed to do for myself and now I can move on.
Right. I'm not going to wonder, could there have been a case there?
Right. Yeah.
So, what type of lawyer should I be then?
A happy one.
Yeah, I always say like, oh, I'm going to be a good lawyer, it really does. I mean, people keep asking me that, and I'm really like thinking, I just started here. I have no idea. But there are others who are like, oh, I want to be a real estate attorney. I want to be a corporate attorney. Like they have a certain kind of path. Was your path that straight, or was it
to be in trial?
You wanted to be in trial.
To be in trial is what I wanted, and then I was diverted, because of my interest in the environment and education.
Right.
But both can ultimately land you in trial. And now, after having done a number of trials, and running the firm, and being made managing partner, my focus is now more on how do I set other lawyers up for success here to also be in court advocating, or not be in court and advocating and counseling and listening, as you said. And so that's kind of like where I am now in my next chapter is figuring out how to set other lawyers up for success. And that's something, again, I didn't see when I went to law school. I thought it was going to be me in the spotlight,
Yeah.
in the courtroom,
Right.
on the stage.
Right.
And
Atticus Finch or some, yeah.
Right.
Right.
Get the Matlock, like the gotcha moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that seems exciting. Mm-hmm. Have you had moments like that? Have you been able to
Yeah.
have like
Yeah. In
courtroom
court?
moments?
Sure. That's
Yeah.
just about listening in court and responding, like on cross-examination.
Uh-huh.
Just got to be in the moment. Just to forget about everything you had planned to say and just listen and try to hear things as the jury is hearing things. And then when someone says something that doesn't make sense, pouncing on it because you're prepared and you know the fact that contradicts, like indisputably contradicts what they just testified to. And then you get to have your gotcha moment.
Slam dunk, the brutal competition. I mean, the mock trial seems like it sets you up for that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because mock trial isn't it isn't really about justice because it's not real.
Right. Right.
So you're just kind of like, how could I win? It's almost like it's actually perfect in a way because it sort of like extracts a lot of those elements and just is about the pure sort of like your side, right? I mean, that's part of what we're learning very early in law school is sort of like the emotionlessness of it, and sort of like try to not attach a story to it. And that part, I think, is sort of like, I don't know, counterintuitive a little bit.
Yeah, that's
Because-
not what you want to do when you have an audience. You
Right.
have to do the storytelling and get them to feel for the client. And that's a hard thing for younger attorneys because when you get out of law school and you are actually sitting across the table from a potential client or a client who's gone through something traumatic, you feel for them, and
Yeah, how
you
could
want
you
to
possibly
fight.
extract that?
Yeah, you want to fight for them. And if you don't, then you're probably not in the right profession or position.
There are people who can fake it really well, I guess.
But you have to figure out then how to balance that and maintain objectivity so that you can see the case as a juror or a judge will see it, someone who's not as close and hasn't had that opportunity to sit with your client one-on-one. So you have to do both. You have to connect with the client, empathize, sympathize, but then you also have to still have the neutral mindset. And that's a growth point for a lot of younger lawyers is, okay, how do I still feel for and advocate for the client, but also connect with the neutral person who's evaluating the case? Because you have to ease in. You can't just come out guns blazing. You lose credibility in an opening statement, especially on the defense.
Well, the jury element is so hard. I mean, to me, and it took me a long time to understand like the point of the jury system. And for me, a lot of times I was sort of like when I was had jury duty earlier in life, I would often like when lawyers and judges are telling me, are you able to look at evidence and then just dismiss it and not think of it at all? I was sort of like,
of course.
How is that possible? How could how could anyone do that?
Humans cannot.
Right.
No.
And yet that is how it works a little bit.
Right.
Like, hey, you know how you heard that the guy actually called her that night? You're not supposed to know that, so just don't think about it. Like, how could I possibly?
Right. Just disregard it because I tell you to disregard
Yes.
it. No, it's the same thing as that. Don't go check social media.
Right.
Yeah, when we break for the day. Sure.
It's so weird. Okay, we got to wrap up. But I'll tell you, there's one thing that hopefully we'll watch some movies together because I think a lot about, and I don't mean literally watch the movies together, but talk about movies.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, there's this one that is like my favorite law movie from the 90s called Primal Fear with Richard Gere and Edward Norton. Do you know
I
this
saw
movie?
that, yes, but it's been a while.
And like it is, every time I watch it, it's like the courtroom scenes get more and more just absurd, like in what's happening, and Richard Gere like getting revenge on people through the cross examinations and everything like that. But I don't know. I thought a lot about that intersection between the sort of like pop culture lawyer and the real lawyer.
Well,
Yeah.
the two movies I used to use in training a lot when I was coaching mock trial at NYU and UC Irvine were My Cousin Vinny and A Few Good Men.
Yes.
Because there are some excellent scenes that are teachable moments from both of those movies.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, some that are so brilliant and some that are absolutely things you don't want to do. But it is. It's a really fun platform to talk about the ins and outs of trial lawyering.
Yeah, I mean, there's documentaries too, and there's one called Murder on a Sunday Morning, and I think that it's probably from like 2005 or something like this. I remember watching it honestly when I was in graduate school for history, and I was thinking I should have gone to law school. This is like, and it's funny because there's a little bit of that path, kind of like where is that path for law school is always coming back. But Murder on a Sunday Morning is a real story about a young, like 15-year-old boy in Florida who was accused of a murder he didn't commit, and it follows the public defender. And he's this dude who's like straight out of like a noir movie. Like he's smoking cigarettes. He's very cynical. But you can tell he is passionate about what has happened to this kid.
Yeah.
And it's all like forced confessions. The cops were awful. This is like in Florida where they did nasty racist shit to this kid.
Yeah.
But the basic idea of this film was showing this public defender and how he worked very, very hard to present to the jury a story that made sense to them. And he sort of hid how angry he was because he was really angry about this case. One of the investigators had taken this kid into the woods and like put a gun in his mouth and made him do the confession. It was like that kind of thing. It was ugly.
Yeah.
Very bad. And the kid got, it was not guilty. It was like, there's a spoiler alert. There's a happy ending to the story. But that guy always stuck with me in part for exactly the balance you're talking about. The sort of like, he's pissed. I want to destroy these cops that have done something bad to this kid. But I also need to do it in a way like that makes sense to a jury who's going to hear this stuff and be like, cops doing this? What are you talking about?
Right.
And it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Navigating all that stuff seems really intense.
It is telling the story, in a way that we all think of storytelling time. There's a beginning and a middle and an end, and there are emotional high points and low points. You can't just come out and say, the cops are evil.
Yes, right. You have to lead them to it.
What they did to this poor kid. Yeah, you have to let people come to their own conclusion because otherwise they feel like it's getting forced down their throats.
There is a cross-examination in that documentary where he goes after one of these cops and trips him up on all his lies. And it's so masterfully done. And I'm always like, watching it, I'm like, I'm excited. And I'm like, yes!
Justice.
But I admired, and I think it was a learning thing for me, I admire how this lawyer was just sort of like very professional about it. And very sort of, you can tell he's going after this guy. He wants to destroy him, but he's also like kind of holding back the emotional element of it because it's so much more delicious to actually get him that way.
You can feel that you like are energized just talking about it. And so I think like back to like one of your opening questions, like how do you know where to go, or what type of law to do? You pay attention to what like energizes you and excites you like that. Even other people.
It's revenge.
Justice.
Yeah. Okay. There's the next philosophical question. What is the line between justice and revenge?
Right.
And we'll watch Kill Bill and think about justice and revenge. But you know what I'm saying, right? And I mean, to me, that's part of the competitive element too. Is like we're gonna win, and in winning, we have achieved like some sort of against the other guy that's done something shitty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why it's justice.
It's
because there's been a wrong.
Right.
You want to hold someone accountable for the wrong.
Right.
And it's a very natural human instinct that's good to play into when you're doing your storytelling.
I would think so. Yeah. Danielle, thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Fun to talk with you. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Look forward to it.
Cool.